Welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. This is episode number 152, and today we're going to learn something about a really interesting category that I know nothing about, and that is mead. So stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris, and this is episode 152. So today we have a special guest, somebody I've had kind of an acquaintance with over the years. From time to time, our paths will cross. But he's going to talk to us about mead. Now, I am not an expert, but he is. So he's going to kind of give us a little bit of the history, how some use cases are in cocktails, and just some general understanding about this category. So today we have on mead expert Samuel Boulton. What's going on, man? How are you?
Hi there. I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Good, man. Good. Yeah, and he's joining us from the UK, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah. Right in the middle.
Perfect. And you also, besides being a mead expert, have a couple other things that you dabble in, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So I got quite a few bits going on. I've always been somebody that can't quite say no to anything that comes up. So I for anybody that listens to this will probably know David Eden Sangwell, who's a close friend of mine. So we live very, very close, and it's not quite. So we have do a lot of work together. So I do the Vermouth Ambassador work on Bartender HQ, which I started a couple of years ago, which was kind of just, I wanted somewhere to collate all the information that I was finding, because I was really struggling to learn about vermouth. So I kind of took it onto my own hands just to start buying vermouth and trying it. And then it branched out to going and visiting places. So when me and David sat down, we were like, I've got all this information and there's nowhere out doing it. So we created the Vermouth Ambassador as part of that. So that's a really interesting thing to go look at. It's got the largest collection of vermouth tasting notes anywhere in the country.
Wow.
Anywhere in the world online at the moment. It's not too much on the historical side of it. It's more about finding products and using them, what they taste like, and trying to get as much information as possible about them. So that's one thing I do. I also work locally for a wholesaler, as well as running and owning my own cocktail bar called the Vanguard, which is what I do predominantly. Most of my time goes on that.
Sure. And then most recently, mead, correct?
And then, so when we opened the cocktail bar, I always wanted a cocktail bar and something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the same over there. I assume it is. Gin bars are everywhere. You got a lot of rum bars, a lot of tequila bars. And I wanted something that was going to really interest me. And the two things that I wanted initially were brandy and vermouth. And we had a little thought about them, and we had a couple other ideas. Mead was one of them. We wanted to potentially look at sherry, kind of all the weird and wonderful stuff we wanted to look at. And it was, we had a few chats, and what we found is a lot of the cognac, especially, or brandy and vermouth, kind of people had preconceptions of. They'd tried it, some loved it, some hated it. And what I wanted was something just completely different and new. Like, a lot of people branded me as a hipster. I wasn't going for the hipster element of it.
Sure.
But I just wanted something interesting that really interested me. And mead was one thing. There's a brand over here called Gosnell's, owned by a guy called Tom Gosnell, and I'd had quite a few meads in the past, and then I accidentally found this one because it was the only one the shop had that I went to, and I was quite last minute we were developing a drink and I needed some last minute. And I found this bottle and I just bought it because I was like, right, it's mead, that'll do. And at this time, to me, mead was mead. I had no clue about differences in them all. And I tried it and it was completely different to anything I'd had before. It was 5.5% sparkling one. So it's much more into it tastes like if you've ever had like Greek yogurt with honey in it.
Mm-hmm.
It tastes just like that, but almost like imagine that in like a sparkling cider. And it was just fantastic. And that changed my mind. So then mead became a part of what we did in the bar.
Sure.
And we initially kind of said, if nobody likes it, we'll just get rid of it and deny it ever happened. Right. It was just, real throwing a penny in the ocean and seeing what happens. And then next thing we know, every article that got published about the bar was to do with the meadery. It was all mead. I was getting phone calls asking people about the new meadery that had opened. So we just kind of went, right, this is clearly something people are enjoying. And then after our first year, I looked at the mead sales and they were just massive.
Okay.
And it was like, we can't ignore this as part of the business any longer. We really need to champion it for the business.
Sure.
Because bearing in mind, for our first year, we never really spoke about it anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just people coming to me that wanted to know. We had over here, we have a charity called the English Heritage Company, and they're in charge of, protecting all of the heritage sites within the UK. So things like Stonehenge being, known all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, kind of a lot of our castles and a lot of our kind of monasteries and you name it. They look after anything that's protected or is kind of a World Heritage site.
Okay.
They look after. And they got in touch with me to help them because they're the biggest sellers of mead in the UK, because they own so many monasteries that they protect, and they all have gift shops and things, and they sell mead in them.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, when they got in touch, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal. In one day, we were in 46 newspapers around the UK.
Oh.
We were in every little place you could imagine. We were on we're in the national news, primetime news. Unfortunately, I wasn't on the news. A photo of me was, but they didn't ask me to go. They had one of their historians, but prior to that, they'd asked me to consult with the historians on mead. So to be asked by the UK's leading experts, like historical experts, to consult on the history of an alcohol was just, it was definitely, it was a bucket list thing I didn't know I had on my bucket list.
Right. Absolutely. That's incredible, man.
So yeah, that was fantastic. So yeah, the Vanguard takes most of my time, and now we're branching out because due to the success of our mead sales, we're now branching and producing our own brand.
Excellent.
Which is kind of our next big step, I think.
Excellent. So first of all, congratulations on all the success. I mean, that just sounds like out of the park success, yeah, definitely on that. And then, so let's take kind of a step back. Because I think a lot of us have heard the term mead get thrown around, have a general understanding of what mead is, but maybe you could kind of talk us through that and give us some definitions, like technically what is mead?
So it's a really easy and hard question to answer at the same time, because actually in America, you guys have a strict definition. It's a protected term, just like cider or anything like that is protected. So you guys have a like regulation in place, whereas most of the world doesn't. In the UK included, we don't currently have any legislation. So for you guys, like legally and technically, it's a product. As far as I know, the kind of loose restrictions you have is that it has to be derived from 51% of honey, which is then fermented into alcohol. I don't think you guys have any restrictions on the ABV or anything like that. There might be some mead experts in America, but I'm just getting in contact with the American Mead Association to ask these questions, actually. Just to finalize that knowledge for us, because a lot of the producers here produce to your standards because we don't have our own. It's one thing that America's quite far ahead of, actually, is your mead world of all things.
Crazy.
So in general, it's accepted as anything that's an alcohol based or flavored with honey, which kind of opens there's some gray areas. For instance, if you buy a white wine and dump a load of honey in it, is that a mead? Now, historically, that would have been a mead at one point. There was with mead, it's quite hard to define it because it's been made. When man first created alcohol, we took any natural sugar we could find. As I'm sure you're aware, natural sugars are basically either honey or fruit. Fruit only grows in certain climates, especially fruit that you can easily turn into alcohol, whereas honey is pretty much everywhere. So that's why you kind of look at the first civilizations that got the ability to create alcohol was all honey based. So it was the Chinese, I think in 9000 BC. Maybe don't quote me properly on that one, but it's around that period. They were the first people to create alcohol, and it was all honey based. And if you look at pretty much any alcohol, most of them were honey based a long point. And it was kind of, nowadays you find that the places that thrive with that have a heritage in mead, it tends to be the places that don't produce grapes, because I think from what I can tell from the research that I've done, kind of when the productions of wine and ale and things became more popular and easier to do, they realized that the yields were far better. So it was easier to produce from fruits and grains and stuff. So that's kind of what happened, kind of the fall of mead almost happened, because these other products were great. There's a few people that kind of championed it, really, which kind of the Vikings are the main one that I think most people associate with mead. And that's because they took mead and they would travel all around the world, and everywhere they went, and whatever they were doing, they would teach the locals how to make it for them. So mead spread around the world, and the reason they drank mead over anything else, because they had access to wine and ale, but those things didn't travel as well. They didn't last on a ship as well, where like beer and wine, obviously wine especially, doesn't travel well at all, especially in those times when they didn't have sealed vessels and things. So the Vikings spread that all around the world, and that's kind of when it got real popular and kind of into mass production and became kind of just a general thing that you would see. But then you think everybody was making it differently. So depending on what class of society you were, you'd get a different kind of mead. So for instance, if it was you were making mead for royalty, you'd have the most amount of honey you could physically get. You'd ferment it as much as you could, get it as strong as you could, and then you'd only serve in the best of the best. And then the next lot of that, so once you've given the best lot to the royalty, the next kind of the almost kind of the leftovers that would go to people. So the low level society, servants and things like that, they would drink mead, but they would be drinking essentially 2% kind of dirty watered honey flavored water, because that's all that they would be able to get. So there's loads of different people that would have loads of different, like if you were royalty and you wanted to show off, you'd have mead made using exotic spices or whatever you could get your hands on, whereas regular folk would be having whatever was in the local area. So it's got so many different ways of being made. Like some would buy wine and sweeten it with honey, and again that would show your wealth. And so that's called nowadays we call that a cyster, which is essentially a honey flavored wine, which a lot of people use that phrase to describe mead in general. But in the US, as I said, it's to be mead, it has to be made from honey. It can't be a product that's flavored with honey.
Now, you kind of touched on the history a little bit, and I'm sure there's a rich history in mead, just because it's been around so long. When we start to kind of wrap our head around mead as a alcohol category, it could be beer or wine, kind of similar processes, right? As far as fermentation and from final product.
So it can be, it's essentially a ferment of honey. That's kind of as simple as you can get it. Now you have the option to do different things to that ferment. Like I said, there is a lot of historical styles and types that have different production processes. So there's ones that have you can incorporate maple syrup into there, as long as the majority of it's honey. That's a different style. There are ones that you can put malted grain or barley and things like that in. So it's quite a diverse category, but as long as the base is predominantly honey, it's up to you. But the two kind of biggest ones that I've seen around the world tend to be Melomels, which is a fruit flavored mead, and that is open to complete interpretation based on whatever you want, really. We have a couple in the UK which are phenomenal. We have a rhubarb one by a winery, and it's genuinely crazy how good it is. We've got other ones, so metheglins are again a really big one, which is spices. So kind of almost a lot of them tend to be quite Christmassy. They use a lot of winter spices, hard spices, things. And I think these kind of styles would have came in later on from the traditional stuff. But as long as you're taking the base, fermenting it with honey, you can call it mead. A couple of processes that are then done. So for instance, you've got some people will water it down quite heavily and take it to quite a low ABV and turn it onto almost like a session kind of mead. You can have ones that have absolutely no water added to them other than what you add into the honey at the beginning. There are ones that you can take the mead and then you can back sweeten it, which is quite commonly done over here, and quite commonly done in general. So you can back sweeten, tends to be with whatever you want. That can be with sugar, honey, maple syrup, whatever you want really, depending on your style. Again, that's kind of up to the creator on what they're going for.
Sure.
So I think there is a certain level of purists that don't like back sweetening, but I think it depends on the product to kind of what it needs. So there are some fantastic back sweetened ones out there, which the one that we're producing is back sweetened because it needed a little bit of extra sweetness to it. But yeah, that's quite an interesting thing that they do, especially if they're back sweetening with, because if they produce with one honey and then back sweeten with another, that will add a whole different layer of flavor.
Sure.
The honey base that you pick,
kind of fermented flavor, and then you get the kind of the fresh flavor of the sweetener behind it too. So you're kind of almost profiles going.
Yeah, because fermented honey isn't very nice. The initial flavor, because the natural product that's obviously produced by bees, but the chemicals that the bees add in naturally during that process, once you ferment out the sugar, there's a reason we add sugar to everything, because it makes it taste better. So once you ferment out the sugar, because a lot of producers, what they'll do is they take their base, like honey water, and ferment that. And they tend to ferment to 0 sugar content, because that's how you get the maximum amount of alcohol. Now, not everybody does that. It's, it very much depends on your star, your yeast, and your conditions and what you're aiming for. But a lot of them will ferment to 0. And fermenting to 0 is not the nicest product in the world, because what you're left with, once you take out that sweetness, is almost, it tastes to me almost like nail polish remover.
Sure.
Because the flavorings themselves, once you concentrated and taken away the sweetening agent, isn't nice. But that's where the craft really comes into it, is to take that and turn it into a drinkable product. And that's why it wasn't until I started to try more and learn more about the process. I have a friend who owns a meadery, and he's got a PhD in microbiology. So I've kind of asked quite a lot of questions about, I'm noticing similarities in certain mead brands, and I was trying to hypothesize what I thought was them. So then I take that to him, and he just completely blows my knowledge out of the water from a scientific standpoint. And he's like, "Oh, actually, it's this compound," and I'm like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, it's just the way it tastes. I'm like, great.
Right.
We're getting
start over and all that stuff. So in general, it sounds like there's so far we've kind of covered 3 major groups of styles of mead. Actually, probably 4. You have the more traditional one, where it's just a honey, essentially a wine. Then you have and I'm going to butcher these names like I always do, so forgive me for that. But mellow meal, you mentioned, was one of them.
Yep.
And that's kind of a sweetened one with fruit. Is that correct?
Yeah, again, the sweetness is up to the producer, but in general, it's just a fruit flavored one.
Okay. And then you have the methylene, which is spice driven, more spice driven. And then you have the one that's back sweetened. Is that kind of correct?
There's a couple different. So, for instance, some people call the one that's back sweetened, like has a high honey content, they call that sack mead.
SACC?
I think SACK.
Oh, okay.
There's if anyone is interested, there is a Mazer Cup in America that you guys have, which is essentially the kind of awarding body for medals when it comes to mead. So they're the people that grade, and they have a really nice, interesting scale on their website of the categories, how they're broken down. I've just realised I made a mistake earlier. I said that it was called a Sister if it's made from wine. It's not. It's called a Piment.
Piment? Okay.
A Sister is with the inclusion of apples in some way. So if you want to create an orchard kind of mead.
Okay.
But yeah, I can send you guys a link, because there is literally 20, 30 different categories or styles on things. Like there's a Rhodamel, which is a rose kind of infused one that was created by the Greeks. And I'll send you the link to have a look at. There's a lot of interesting different styles, and a lot of them actually aren't available anymore, at least readily available, especially in the UK.
Sure.
Because a lot of these meaderies are up and coming small companies, so they're not something that you'll find everywhere. So some of them are, if you ever do see them, it's definitely worth grabbing and trying one, because a lot of them I haven't tried personally because they're just not available here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely, and we'll include that link to the American Spirit or Mead Company or American Mead Award place on the show notes. So definitely check that
Yeah.
out. Also, now when we talk about mead, is there a traditional way of serving this alcohol? Like that can be part of the interesting conversations you have with guests if there's like traditional glassware or a ceremony or anything like that. Is there anything specific to mead with
So
serving?
mead would have been included in a lot of ceremonies, like kind of, especially in paganism.
Mm-hmm.
Paganism is very into their mead drinking. But in terms of glassware and things like that, absolutely none. I think it massively fell out of vogue way before people were thinking about that. Now, I think the traditional one that people think of is things like flagons and horns and kind of these medieval drinking vessels.
That
So,
could be pretty epic. That could be a
so
great way
yeah,
to serve that.
that could be the closest thing, anything you see kind of like a chalice or anything like that.
Right.
But in terms of like, kind of looking at almost like a cognac, like a brandy snifter balloon kind of thing for cognac.
Uh-huh.
There is, unfortunately, which is a major shame. I personally like to drink all of mine. I tend to drink them all neat,
Mm-hmm.
and I also drink them at room temperature. And that's just my personal opinion of how I like to drink it. Because what I find with honey-based things is once you start to chill them down too much, you start to lose a lot of the nuances. Because it's kind of it's kind of like not dissimilar to red wine in terms of like once you chill it down, you kind of end up with a flat product.
Sure.
Whereas that little bit of not adding warmth, but not chilling it down, I think you do get. But then I have had some where the producer has swore blind, have it cold, and I've tried it cold and it has been really good. So I think again, the category is still kind of emerging. So drink it how it says on the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
But me personally, I like to try them all. I drink them all at room temperature, which is a weird thing to think. But we drink our ale room temperature over here, so it's not too
So
weird for
strange.
me.
So weird. I'm kidding. No, and I think it's true. Like I remember when I was buying wine and stuff, I would often ask for white wine room temperature because you get all the nuance, you get all the flavor, and then you can always drop it down in temperature pretty quickly if you wanted to. But that's where you get the kind of the purest expression of a lot of wines and this kind of ingredients. Now, excuse me. So with being the Vanguard, a cocktail focused bar, and
Mm-hmm.
mead, I assume that you probably have cross pollinated those two things. So there's crossover, and a lot of your cocktails and stuff probably feature mead. How well does this ingredient really play with cocktails?
So it's really interesting. Initially, when we opened, the plan was to keep them separate. It was we are a cocktail bar that does mead,
Mm-hmm.
um, and quite quickly, I think we did have one on our very first menu that we said, right, we'll cross the gap with this just in case anybody asks, and it just happened to be it was a drink with it was called the bartender's handshake. It was a drink created around Fernet Branca.
Mm-hmm.
And we included a sparkling mead, but the mead wasn't there to add any real complexity to the drink or anything. It was just there to kind of, because Fernet needs kind of, you need to add in things that are gonna kind of almost tame the Fernet, but then we also we added in the mead to kind of lengthen the drink out to be able to break down the Fernet's abrasiveness.
Intensity, yeah.
Yeah. So it's just there to make the Fernet more palatable. And you probably wouldn't ever know it was in there, but it made a massive difference if you took it out. And that was the only thing. But because of it having mead in and on the menu, it sold really well.
Sure.
Then that kind of went right. And as I said, after our first year, we included things over the year that included some mead. We did a Rhubarb Negroni, which was a take on a Negroni with Aperol.
Okay.
If you've ever had one of them, just kind of more approachable, sweet. So we completely swapped out the vermouth for a rhubarb mead and then Aperol and gin. And we serve it. It's all pre-batched. It comes on crystal clear block ice. Like you can literally have it in a second. It's straight to your table. So it's like the quickest drink you ever make.
Sure.
But that went down really well. So then we, just at the beginning of this year, we launched for the UK anyway. I'd hesitant to say world because I'm sure somebody might have done it somewhere. But for the UK, we launched the UK's first mead-only kind of forward cocktail menu. So every drink featured a different mead. There were some base spirits in there that we used as modifiers. So for instance, we have one that's, almost all of them have, an ounce or more of mead in, depending on the drink itself. Some of them are just mead. Some of them, I think one of them has 3 ounces of mead in there because it's a medium strength mead, so it's only 14-ish%.
Okay.
That one kind of helps with the more of that you add, the better it is. So we kind of now put our foot in that pond quite heavily, wanting to really take it and push it forward. But we found tons of issues when doing it. One, all the meads taste completely differently. So what we originally were doing was trying to create a drink around the mead. And what actually we found is we would think of loads of ideas that we want to do, that would drinks that we want to include mead on. We found for our clientele at the bar, taking a classic drink and putting mead in it some way is a really good kind of gateway into it.
Sure.
A lot of them like the idea of trying it, but they don't want to drink a glass on its own. But so when we've done, say, a mead Tom Collins, it's a really easy transition for them to go, okay, I know what a Tom Collins is like. And then they try ours with mead and they really like it. And then it kind of makes that first purchase of a glass of mead quite easy for them.
Sure.
But the way we do that is we'll take the classic, break it down into what kind of style. So say it's a Manhattan. Obviously, it's quite boozy. It's quite strong. It's got a little bit of fruit in there as well. So what mead do we think is going to fit that, and how meady do we want to make it as well? Because some drinks. So, for instance, we've got a Mead Colada on the menu, and
such a great name.
Obviously, is a pina colada with mead, but it's so it's very, very mead forward. It is like, so the way we make that one in particular, it's a coconut rum, it's coconut puree, pineapple juice, a little bit of malic acid, shaken, and then it's topped with one of our sparkling meads. But the sparkling mead we've gone for is quite a very almost simple palate one. It's just honey flavored. It's not got loads of nuances. It's got not got loads of kind of like, interesting tasting notes about it. It's very plain honey forward. It's almost like if you were to buy a run of the mill strawberry flavored cider, it's kind of what you expect. It's imagine that it's just a honey flavored cider almost in the way it tastes. It's very simple. So that one we go half and half. It's half mead, half pina colada, and that flies out the door.
Sure.
I think I might have simplified it a bit there, but it's with that one we've gone very mead heavy, whereas other ones, say again, we'll go back to the Manhattan, or say like an old fashioned, we'll do an old fashioned with a hint of mead or a hint of honey kind of thing, because we don't want to wash those drinks out by making them something completely different.
Right. They still kind of have to represent that classic cocktail at the end of the day.
Yeah. Like with the pina colada, that one was kind of like, I mean, as long as it's pineapple and coconut, it kind of resembles it. Right. So with that one, we pushed as far as we could with it. We kind of just went, how much mead can we get into this drink, basically, with it still being a pina colada? And it turns out we can get almost half the drink is mead.
Nice. All right.
But it works. So it was kind of, we have quite I'd like to say we have a really in-depth selection process. Actually, it tends to be our gut feeling. The guy that works on me, I've got a bartender called Luke. He's kind of runs the venue most of the time when I'm not there. He's a fantastic barman and really good at creating and crafting drinks. So we tend to, between us, it go on our gut. It's like, right, soon as tends to be one of us will try it and we'll just have an instant idea like, this needs to go in a Tom Collins, or this needs to go in a Negroni, or whatever that classic we choose is. And then some of them we just go, well, that one's really weird. We're not putting that in any, that one needs to be something created on its own.
Right.
And it has happened where we've tried one and we've just done, this product's too good to shadow by going in a classic. It needs to shine on its own, which is really interesting when that does happen, because it gets us excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I understand there's kind of a lot of, it sounds like the flavor profiles of mead are all over the place depending on what you select and the producer and the flavor
Yeah, yeah.
that you end up with. But have you noticed any tendencies for mead to gravitate towards certain spirits? Like it's really, I know you said Fernet was a good one just because it stretches it out, provides that backbone of sweetness that it needs. But in your
Yeah, actually.
experimentation.
And it's really interesting because it's definitely not what you'd think. So when we first started talking in the bar about drinks, we pretty much always ended on gin, because juniper and honey are fantastic. There are a lot of historical references to juniper mead.
Mhm.
I think one, because juniper grows so heavily in so many places, so I think that was why a lot of people used it. But also the flavors complements. We were like, gin, we'll just put it with loads of gin, and it does work fantastically with gin. But one thing that really took us by surprise. So the bar, I have a massive pride on my back bar of trying to collect a very eclectic bar. Like I think at the moment we have just over 300-ish lines in the bar. So it's a decent sized back bar especially for the size venue we are. But it by far is, again, I'm biased, but in my opinion, it's the best back bar in our city because it's so eclectic. There is, you know, you tend to have in most bars. I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but you'll go in there, they'll have maybe one or two brandies. It tends to be a really expensive one, and then the house, and maybe one in the middle. Whereas we have like 35 brandies, and that's where we found that fruit brandy or eau de vie and mead are matches made in heaven. And
Interesting.
it was really odd that somebody mentioned it to me about using eau de vies in like a dasher bottle, like almost as like as a seasoning in the drink. And I was like, why would you do that? Because I was such a fan of using, you know, a lot of eau de vie because I love it. And he was like, oh, it's really expensive, which I'll give him that. But when we started doing it, we made one drink, and it was I wanted it to be a really mead heavy. So it was for Tales of the Cocktail when they were on tour in Edinburgh. We were doing a takeover in Edinburgh. We got invited to do one because a bar called Clou Calais from London had dropped out. So they asked me to go in instead, so we jumped at the opportunity, and we wanted to do a very mead heavy, mead forward drink for that because we thought, you know, why not? It's what we're all about. So we developed this drink, and I just couldn't get the sweetness level right. It didn't matter. The more mead I took out, the less mead flavored it got, and I wanted it to be super meady. And I just needed something to cut the sweetness. I'd tried citrus, I'd tried everything, and it was this friend that just said, "Try dashing in some eau de vie." And I kind of thought, all right, fine, I'll try it because I respect him, but I think it's a dumb idea. And it was the best idea I've ever been given by somebody.
No kidding.
Few drops. It was a pear eau de vie we used. It was St. George's, which is an American company. It was their pear eau de vie that we used, and the drink was phenomenal. It was genuinely, I think it's one of the highlights of my career in terms of if I had to single a drink, I'd be like, that is my best drink I've ever made. With a lot of help, I'll give them that. So yeah, and we just found that since then we've used eau de vie in a lot of different ways to complement mead. Literally 5 ml, a few drops. It almost somehow sucks up the sweetness. I think because it's so dry and there's like so little sugars added, all the sugars have gone from the fruit themselves, that as soon as you start putting it into something sweet, it dries the drink out so quickly. And that has been like a revolution, because obviously mead, a lot of meads they tend to be on the sweeter side. If you were to sum it up into two styles, you have a dessert wine-ish style, which is what they predominantly are. They are predominantly sweeter products. So being able to find a way of kind of leveling out the sweetness was a revolution for the mead drinks world in my area anyway.
Absolutely. No, that sounds great. It's an ingredient I don't think I would have reached for either. Like,
No.
you know, but that's really cool. I'm gonna have to experiment with that down the road for sure. Now, when serving high volume of mead, like a lot of it, like probably you do, is there any special considerations you have to have? Like, I know with wine, oxidation is kind of the enemy. Is there anything like that you have to really worry about with mead?
Yes, and it very much depends on what the producers give you, essentially. We have a collection of I think at the moment we have 10 of the like a sweeter style, and they're all pasteurized and shelf stable. You know, we had a bottle that we opened when we first started, because my real worry, as you've said, was oxidization. So we opened it and just tested it, the same bowl, for over the like 6 months when we were developing the bar and kind of getting things ready to launch. And there was almost no change in the product whatsoever. So we knew that those were fine, but then since then finding more, if it's a drier, what we found is if there's not much back sweetening, so it's a drier product, then that tends to be more susceptible to oxidization. We have one which my friend Ben, the microbiologist, makes his mead. It's 5.5%, so it's still got a lot of natural sugar in there, but it's quite a dry style of mead, and that one can be susceptible to oxidization. You know, so we keep that one sealed and in the fridge, whereas the other ones they're fine to go on a shelf. But then we also have some carbonated ones, so obviously lack of carbonation is an issue, same as it would be with the champagne or whatever. So yeah, but in terms of like serving it in temperatures and stuff like that, it's only really oxidization that we found is an issue. Like I said, we serve pretty much all of them at room temperature. It's only a select few that we choose to chill down. So it tends to be quite an easy thing to serve, especially like it will last. From my experience, most of them will last longer than a wine as well. Like a bottle of wine, you've probably got less than 7 days ish before it starts to turn in your bar. Whereas mead, I'd say for the ones that we stock, you can tend to get just shy of 3 weeks out of them before they start to become non-servable.
Yeah.
But for us, that's not really a problem because we turn them all over in that period. But
Sure.
yeah, there's I have had a couple of brands that producers have sent me bottles to try, and they've oxidized in their bottles, and it's been I thought one brand was like horrid because of how badly it was oxidized, and then I spoke to the producers and he was like, it should not taste like that at all. So we got another bottle and it was fantastic stuff. It was really good, but theirs is bone dry. Like they ferment to 0 and they add nothing. So it's quite like they are very targeting the wine market themselves, so they want it a bone dry product. So it's completely different to anything else we'd had before. So yeah, oxidization, but again, like I said, it completely depends on the brand and how they're doing it. The best thing to do is just phone them up and ask them what they're doing or how they're making. What I found is mead producers in general are very open about what they do, because it's so up and coming. There's no industry secrets, if you will, with them. They're all quite happy to talk about it. They want to talk about their products, of course they do.
Right, absolutely.
So yeah, so ask them what they think, and they'll know if it's susceptible to oxidization.
Sure. And I remember earlier in the podcast you mentioned that this is one of the big things that the Vikings liked about it, is because it was a little bit more stable than wine or ales or beer or anything like that, so they can take it on ships and still have a supply. So that would absolutely make sense. And yeah, it's really fascinating about that. Now, one last question for you. I love a good story. I love kind of the history of products and how they kind of intertwine with our industry. As you look back at kind of all the stories and all the research that you've done with mead, is there any one particular story that you love telling?
Yes, there is. And it actually ties in with our brand, and it's become part of what we want to perceive as for our mead brand. So it was my partner that brought it to my attention. So because with mead, you've got a couple different avenues of its history. You've got the Vikings history, but then you've also got Norse mythology, which is massive for it. So Norse mythology, obviously, you know, any comic book films that are coming out nowadays, like Thor and all that, it's all intertwined. All these characters have been drinking mead since their existence. And there is one that really, I don't know if you know much about the Marvel kind of Thor and Asgard and stuff like that, but there is one story that really stuck with me, and it's about a goat, and the goat is called Heidrun, which if you do want to look it up, you can find a lot of this on just Wikipedia and stuff. But the goat is called Heidrun, and he's referenced in some poems, and I don't know the poems, and I'm definitely not going to try and recite them for you because they're quite long. But he lives above Asgard. He's the goat of unending mead, they call him. And the brief summary I'll give you of the story and the poem is that he eats from the tree of life, which lives above Asgard, and from the tree of life and the leaves that he consumes, she excretes mead from her teats into a cauldron. That cauldron is the cauldron of life, and it's where the gods drink the gods' nectar, which is mead made from the goat of unending mead, and the gods drink this, and that's what gives them their powers. And that was something that we heard that, and we were like, this is fantastic. Like, it's a goat that creates mead from the tree of life, and it lives above a mythological Asgard of heaven.
That's incredible.
So yeah, that's probably my favorite kind of tale of Norse mythology and mead all intertwined. And yeah, it's fantastic.
That's pretty cool.
And because of that, like I said, we when we were designing our brand, we had a lot of ideas what we wanted to do. And because of mead's history, we wanted to have a nod to mead's history on the label in some way. And I sent over to our designer a couple of ideas I thought what could be quite interesting, and one of them just said goat. And I'd not wrote the name or anything, so the designer got back to me and was like, what do you mean by goat? And I was like, oh. And I sent him the links and stuff, and I explained the story, and he was next thing we know, all the artwork we got was goat related in some way.
Interesting.
So Heatherune has kind of become our mascot for the brand.
That's pretty cool. That's a great story too, and I think it's very relevant, especially with Endgame coming out and everybody kind of getting into a whole new universe of characters. That's pretty crazy. I do love a good historical story that intertwines with alcohol. So now there is a lot of rich history with mead. There's a lot of things that you can know and learn about, because I think a lot of people are probably coming from a similar place to me, where never really been introduced to it, doesn't really understand the history, hasn't really wrapped their head around mead. What are some of the good resources that you would recommend that people look at to learn more?
Yeah, so there's a lot out there in terms of the history of mead. Now, you have to look in places that aren't necessarily booze related history to find them. So that kind of does cause a barrier. Now, the best thing that I found is YouTube by far. Okay. YouTube, especially if you want to learn to make mead. If you want to learn to create your own mead, then there is tons of resources on YouTube. There are books and everything. But if you want to kind of learn about the lore and kind of the practical uses for it, there are very thin and far apart uses. YouTube is by far the best. Okay. And Google is its best friend. But the source that I would definitely send people to, which I'm pretty sure you can get in America as well as the UK quite easily, the book is just called Mead: The Libations, Legends and Lore of History's Oldest Drink, by a guy called Fred Manick, who has ties to the National Bourbon Museum in Kentucky. Okay. So it's wrote by very credible sources. I'm just working my way through the book now, and it is really interesting. Like I said, it's a book about the history, the lore, the legends. It kind of intertwines mead's history rather than just being a book of history about where it's been found. It also includes the lore and the history, and it's also got tons of cocktails in there. And I don't know if you're the same, but when you kind of buy a book and there's cocktails, you kind of expect them to be a little bit rubbish.
Sure.
No one ever expects them to be absolutely amazing unless it's a Dave Arnold book or whatever it is.
Right.
But the book and the drinks are fantastic. Like the first one I opened had like 4 of my favorite ingredients in, and I was like, this is a sign of some sort that this book is for me.
Right. Absolutely.
So that book is definitely worth getting. It's not that expensive either, and I think you might even be able to get a Kindle edition of it as well.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, I'll definitely look it up and include it in the show notes, because I feel like I would like to read this book as well. It sounds pretty fascinating. Perfect. Now, I know that you have a couple companies. You're talking about you've opening your own meadery and stuff. But if people want to ask you questions and kind of follow up with this podcast, do you have any favorite avenues for that? Your favorite social media or email or website?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find my two companies, you've got at Vanguard Bar on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, or you can get my Modern Mead company, which is my brand, at on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Modern Mead Co. So they're very easy, very simple to find. Pretty much just type in Mead or Vanguard and you should find me.
Okay.
In some way.
Perfect. Now, besides kind of what we're talking about, is there any other exciting books or seminars that you're going to be giving down the road? Anything you kind of want to plug for anybody to pay attention to?
Yeah, so if anybody wants to get me personally, so I have my brands which all come through to me, or if you want to go into my personal account on Instagram, I'm at the Vermouth Ambassador. So before Mead was my first love and long-term love affair still is vermouth, and the vermouth world is fantastic. It's very hard to get a lot of information from those companies. So like I said earlier, we started the Vermouth Ambassador. And one of kind of my pipeline dreams was always to write a book. So I'm writing a book called, or the working title is The Vermouth Ambassador's Guide to Mixed and Fancy Drinks, which, you know, I don't want to say is coming soon because it's been in work for a while, but we are getting towards the end stages now. We're getting towards kind of, we're all the writing's pretty much done, and we're just the editing, I've been told, is the longest part. So yeah, we'll be keep an eye out for that to come by the end of this year, as a definite.
All right,
if it's not out, but
let us know when that goes out.
Yeah,
excellent.
That's kind of been a long time in the making. It's going to have some drinks created by some of the best bartenders around the world. Basically, I've contacted as many people as I can, and in fact, Chris, if you want to send over a recipe with vermouth, that would be fantastic. We can definitly get that in.
Oh, mine wouldn't stand up to everybody else's, that's for sure.
So yeah, so it's going to be a really good interest. It's kind of the book is going to be predominantly focused on practical uses for vermouth. It's not a history book or or just kind of something to kind of, it's not a coffee book, a coffee table book. It's definitely something that if you want to learn how to keep your vermouth, or how vermouth is produced, or, you know, how to use it, essentially, it's a practical guide to doing those things. So there are, you know, the history section, I think, is maybe 500 words. Okay. And I think the book directs you to better sources, because there are some great sources out there for vermouth history, but I want to focus on getting it off the back bar, getting it into a fridge and getting it used in more drinks, which we tackle a lot of different ways of doing that based, you know, we even break down if you're a tiny little bar that does, you know, 20 cocktails a week and only one of them has vermouth in and it's only 5 ml. How do you keep that fresh? To how does that bar then go to doing 2 bottles of vermouth a week by using more, picking the right ones? Half the time it's just picking the right vermouth and using it the right way, but also trying to challenge that perception of vermouth is just for a Negroni or a Manhattan and nothing else. So if you're interested in a practical use for vermouth, then this is definitely going to be the book for you.
And I got to say, I do love the working title. I like the historical nod to some of the older books out there. That's
yeah, cool. Exactly. There's a couple of working titles that we've gone through. The other one was the Vermouth Ambassador's Guides to Vermouth Around the World, which we were potentially going to go like 80 days around the world kind of thing, but we shied away from it. But
excellent. But yeah, you'll definitely have to let us know when that comes out, and of course we'll be happy to help on anything we can do on our end. But man, I can't thank you enough for your time and the amount of education you gave us around the subject of mead. And also, is your mead available for purchase worldwide?
It isn't yet. We're still in the very, very early stages of the company. Our first production run should be starting any minute now. We are literally just waiting on the labeling company to pull their finger out and get going. Once that's gone, we'll be live in the UK overnight. We've already had the biggest online retailer for the UK come and buy, have placed an order for mead. So they're also now going into America. So we'll be quite quickly trying to get into the American market, but we don't want to bite off too much too quickly. So we'll see.
Right. Absolutely. Well, as always, definitely keep me posted on that, because I wouldn't mind giving it a shot myself. So, but yeah, thanks again, man. I definitely appreciate it, and we'll probably follow up in the future. Yeah, we'll have some more podcasts for everyone down the road. So, cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Once again, thanks to Samuel Boulton for joining us on the podcast, and we'll have a link to all the resources that he was talking about in the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/152. Now, if you're looking for bar tools, I highly recommend checking out some of the bar tools that we have. We just launched our store, and that was episode number 150. So there's definitely some cool tools inspired by a lot of my frustrations behind the bar. So check out our bar tools over at shop.barabove.com.